right. I am here to show us really some strategies of going about how to effectively create your George Washington comic strip. Um, what I want to do is just kind of go through the process of how I would do it and hopefully give you some tips to be able to have an effective comic strip. The first thing you want to do, of course, is read the directions. We're going to create a comic strip highlighting some of George Washington's major accomplishments during the Revolutionary War. And then on your comic strip, you need to explain one major accomplishment of George Washington, and we're going to choose from one of the following items. Now, if you recall, there are some other items that I said you can use on this website, and I'll take a look at that here in just a second to figure out what I want to do it on. Then it says for each comic include the following information. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be what I need once I pick my topic, that I need to answer these questions. Who was involved, where it took place, when it happened, and what were the results. So in an effort to remain paperless and make sure I've got what I need, I'm going to copy and paste these questions because that's just going to help me know what it is that I need to look for. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to create a Google Doc. I'm going to go over here into my Google homepage. I'm going to open up a doc. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose an empty doc and I'm going to paste those questions on the doc. So then I have them and I can kind of go back and forth between my research and what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and paste, yep, there we go, paste those questions here. And I'm going to, whoop, we don't need this extra stuff. So we'll get that out of there. And what we want to do is I'm going to give myself some room so I can add some information to those. So now I've set myself up to be able to record the information. And I'm actually going to put a title on this thing so I know what's up. And this is research for my George Washington GW comic strip. All right, so now I've kind of set myself up here for what I need to do in terms of making my project. So this just gives me some help, and then if I click, whoops, let me center this, blow it up a little bit. We like to make it look nice. So now we're there, and I'm going to do that because it'll automatically, whatever's highlighted here will turn into my title. So now I can find it if I need to find it in my Google Drive, because remember, it automatically saves when we do that. So now I've got that set up, and what I want to do is I'm going to use the resource that was put on Google Classroom in order to figure out my information that I need to include in this. Now, like I said before, one of the things that we want to do is look at, in this case, I'm more interested in the battles that George Washington fought, so I'm going to go through this list and see what I can find. There's the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Long Island, Kips Bay, Harlem Heights, White Plains. Let's see, Fort Washington, Fort Lee, Trenton, Second Trenton, Princeton, the Forage War, Battle of Brandywine, Battle of the Clouds, Germantown, White Marsh, Monmouth, Yorktown. So that kind of wraps things up in terms of the battle. So I don't care what battle you choose. And it might, in terms of an accomplishment, it might be a loss. So we'll just see once where we're at. So now there's some information here, just general oversight. It has a date, so that's a good thing. So I know it's the Battle of Long Island. I know that it's August 27, 1776. Oh, and if I recall, one of the things that I need is what were the results, and it happens to give me the results. So I've got a name, I've got a date, I've got this, so I've already got a few of the things that I need. But I like this idea of learning more. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to copy and paste this stuff so I already have it before I even look it up. So when you copy and paste a date, you don't necessarily need a bibliography or a citation for that. I'm just going to put it on here because that's just common knowledge, and we need, I say common knowledge, but it's something that is shared easily. Result, I'm going to do the whole thing, copy it, go back to my research. Oh, and what I have are results. So now two of my things are already done. I haven't even started reading yet, so that's not a bad thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Learn More. I'm going to see once what we have here, and I'm glad I copy and pasted that stuff because it seems to have disappeared as I open this. But here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to read and reread a couple of things. Now, if I have to stop to gather some information, I will go ahead and do that. But what I want to do is make sure I know what I'm looking for. So I got the who, the where, and the what. Those are the things I'm looking for. Usually the what would be the summary of the event. Who was involved, who was fighting, where it took place. there might be a couple of different items here. So after the British evacuated Boston on March 17, 1776, General George Washington guessed correctly that their next target would be New York. By mid-April, Washington had marched his 19,000 soldiers to lower Manhattan. He strengthened the batteries and guarded the harbor and constructed forts in northern Manhattan and on Brooklyn Heights across the East River on Long Island. So now, when I talk about the who, this actually gives me some good information. So I'm just going to put George Washington, of course, and I'm going to put Continental Army General. Okay, and then I'm actually gonna tab this out and do the 19,000 soldiers because I like to know the numbers of how many people, and I'm just gonna put Continentals. Now I'm making sure that if I go back and I see these words, I want them to be spelled correctly. So you can usually find that here in some of the writing, and we'll see if it shows up here. It talks about Lower Manhattan. It talks about New York. So in my first paragraph, I've actually got some good research for that, where it took place. I know Manhattan is in New York, and that's something that you can look up. But I'm going to put New York, and then I'm going to put Manhattan, and then they said Brooklyn Heights as well, I believe. So those are all places that it sounds like that some of this stuff is taking place. So I've got a bunch of info already. I want to see who else is involved because George Washington had to have fought against somebody. So we're going to see once what we can find. But now I'm just really looking for the summary of what we've got here. So as I continue, it says, Washington waited throughout June for the British to appear, hoping that somehow his undisciplined troops could hold off an attack, which he was certain would come in Manhattan. In early July, 400 British ships with 32,000 men, commanded by General William Howe, arrived at Staten Island. When Howe offered a pardon to the rebels, Washington answered, "Those who have committed no fault want no pardon." While he was still convinced that the British would attack Manhattan, he sent more troops to Brooklyn. So I'm looking at this. All of a sudden, I have a name, and I've got some things that I think are really good information. So I'm going to include General Howe and his 32,000 troops in my... So I'm going to put General Howe, and I'm going to put British Army. I'm going to assume he's a general because he sounds like the guy in charge, but we'll look to see if there's any information in that. And then, what did I say, 32,000 troops? You can always go back and check to make sure, but I'm thinking it was 32,000 British troops, right? Now, interestingly enough, I like this idea. I'm going to use some of the information about what happened. When I go back to this, there's some really visual things in here that I think would help with my comic strip. 400 British ships. So if I go on here, I'm going to put that down here. What happened? 400 British ships arrived at Staten Island. Okay, so I think that's a good visual to really get an idea of what we're dealing here. And I'm just going to put 32,000 troops because they were on the boat. So that's just a good thing that I think would be kind of neat to include in my comic strip. And I also am going to, this quote is kind of cool in terms of George Washington. So I'm just going to put this quote down here as part of my what happened. And no, oops, that didn't work. Go back to it. Copy. Now let's try it. Whoops. No, I don't need help. I need this. So I'm going to get rid of this. I wonder if I can just put it right in there. That would be cool. Hey, look at that. All right, so we've got this cool quote that might be good for a comic strip as well. So as I'm reading down, it says Washington placed General Israel Putnam. I could include this name in there, but I want to keep it about George Washington, so I can talk about generals beneath him. In charge of Brooklyn Heights and stationed General John Sullivan in the south and Lord Stirling to the southwest on the heights of Gowan. He posted guards along the main roads leading through the heights, but failed to secure the rarely used Jamaica Pass. So this proved to be a costly mistake since General Howe planned to lead 10,000 men through the pass on the evening of 1826. So when they're saying that this proved to be a costly mistake, I'm going to going to highlight this. And just so I have it, and I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put it into my own words here in just a minute, but I think this is good information to include, right? Because it's talking about a mistake that he made, which is interesting. At the same time, General Leopold Philip von Heister would launch his Hessians against Sullivan's troops, while the redcoats of General James Grant would attack Sterling's position. So I'm going to include Hessians as well in here, because that's a name of a group that we talk about, and I'm just going to put Hessians. I'm not going to get real specific, but that's definitely somebody, those mercenaries, right? While the redcoats of General James Grant would attack Sterling's position, early on the morning of August 27, British troops fired on American pickets stationed near the Red Lion Tavern at a crossroads in Brooklyn. Washington hurried across the East River from Manhattan, but could do little more than observe the fight from the redoubt on Cobble Hill. Sullivan's men fought bravely, but were cut down by Hessian artillery and bayonets. When he realized that the main British force had come through the Jamaica Pass and would soon surround him, Sullivan ordered his men to retreat to Brooklyn Heights before he himself was captured. So this is interesting. So they came through and they surrounded these guys, all right? So I'm going to put that in there as well. So now Sullivan orders men to retreat, so doesn't sound good. General Sterling held off the British for several hours, but retreated, there's that word again, when he also realized that he would be surrounded. So those are a couple of things. He led 400 Maryland soldiers in a desperate fight at the Old Stone House, giving his soldiers time to flee before he was taken prisoner. Washington, who looked down on the terrible scene, could only remark, "Good God, what brave fellows I must lose." So that's another good quote, because, boy, that tells you a lot about what they're feeling at the time. So I'm going to put that in there as well. And I'm just copying and pasting. Like the quotes I'm not going to change, but some of this other stuff I'm definitely going to change for my comic book. So in this video, okay, so this is a video about a guy. We could watch that. I would encourage you to do it. I'm not going to do it right now because I want to get this info. General Hall halted the fighting in early afternoon and directed his men to dig trenches around the American position on the next day. Before they could be surrounded, Washington ordered them to evacuate Long Island. From late in the evening of August 29 to dawn the following morning, Washington watched as 9,000 Continentals were rowed back to Manhattan. As the sun came up, a fog miraculously descended on the remaining men crossing the river. According to eyewitnesses, General George Washington was the last man to leave Brooklyn. So, big loss here. But nonetheless, I think I got some good information. I particularly like this, a fog miraculously descended. I wonder if I can put that in my comic strip. That sounds, I can kind of see it. It's very visual. So I'm just going to copy and paste this last piece here. I'm going to put it down at the bottom. All right, so I'm going to go like this. I'm going to do, let's do some bullet points, because that'll help separate my ideas here when I come back to it. So I feel like I got a good idea of what happened. Here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end. And I think I've got all the research that I need to create a comic strip about the Battle of Long Island. So when I come back, I'll show you how I'm going to use that for my comic strip. So thanks for watching.